Hi. So, when I was in New York last year for the first time in my life, there was one thing that I noticed immediately when I got there, and that was a campaign called Be Someone's Subway Story. That campaign, don't be someone's subway story. I'm so sorry. Be someone's subway story is mine. And that campaign is all over the subway in New York. You can find it everywhere. And it's supposed to remind people that courtesy counts, as it says, that you're supposed to be very respectful towards other people, and that you should make a bad impression when you're on the subway with a whole group of diverse other people that frequent the trains in New York. I personally feel like that's very negative, and I'm a big fan of saying be someone's subway story. Make people remember you in a very positive way. And when I was in New York, and that's why I love that positive version of this thing so much, I had a lot of positive experiences on the subway in New York, and I felt very seen, especially as a queer person, and a lot of queer people in New York on the subway were my subway story. So let me take you back. I was in New York for the first time in my life last spring. I'd flown for the first time. I'd never been away this far from home. And even though everything was very chaotic and I saw a lot of people that I'd never seen before, coming from a small village in Germany, there was one thing that I immediately fell in love with, and that was the subway in New York. There were so many people, and as a very dedicated follower of people watching, I immediately felt very, very much at home. And I didn't just watch people, I also started drawing them. And started sketching them every time I went to college or I took a trip somewhere. And I just really, really loved doing that, because kind of watching these people gave me a very profound sense of well-being, but just seeing them go about their day. And that was what inspired me to make this animated movie for a class in college. And especially one group of people, queer people, became my inspiration for that film. And I'm going to show you that film now. It's very short, but precise, I hope.
And clear up the closing doors, please.
So that's my film, and those are the two main characters, and I brought them with me today. I shipped them all the way from New York to Paderborn. As you can see, the people that inspired me most on the New York subway were queer people, because for the first time in my life, I had a very consistent queer representation that I didn't have when I was in Paderborn. And in the movie, you can see the couple. They find queer representation not just each other, but also maybe being perceived from the outside by other people. I think one of the things that I remember most from the New York subway is one particular moment. It was morning, and I was very tired, but there were two men and a kid, and they had like a buggy with them, and the man, they kissed each other on the mouth. And even though I can't assume anything about what I saw for me, I just saw a queer, very happy family, and that felt very, very nice, and I felt very seen for the first time in my life, because I realized that queer families can exist in public spaces just as heteronormative families can. And so queer representation in public life was just something that suddenly came into mind. And for the first time, I realized how important it was, because the more diversity I kind of realized is found in a public space, the more people feel actually safe to be themselves around there. And I actually did, for the first time, started using they, them pronouns, which I hadn't done before, and I started wearing pride pins and bracelets, just because I realized that it was nice as a queer person seeing all those in a public space. So the queer representation on the New York subway changed my life in a very profound way, and these people became my subway stories, even though I didn't really know them. So when I came back to Paderborn, that all changed quite a lot, because I realized when I came back that I felt quite lonely and quite unsafe again, because the representation on the buses here, very, very different from New York. because the city is a lot smaller. And I kind of had to rely on the belief there were more queer people here, and I didn't just see them like I did in New York. And expression of my queerness suddenly felt very, very scary, and didn't just feel scary, it kind of for a fact is very, very scary for queer people. The BKA has a statistic that kind of tells about the hate crimes against sexuality or related to sexuality and gender, that they have increased about 10 times since 2010 in Germany, which is a lot. And it really is a realistic possibility for me, as a non-binary queer person, to get harassed in public. It's not a nice feeling, and kind of being back in a small town, that feeling became very, very, very strong. And I realized that if I wanted to be queer in public, that would take a lot of courage for me, and that being someone's subway story required me to take a risk. So I decided to take that risk and really quickly realized that there was one thing in a small town that built very quickly, and that's community. Found a lot of friends that were queer because we're not a lot, and if you're not a lot and if you can recognize each other, you can find each other quite quickly. And suddenly I felt just a little bit safer and not as lonely, which is very lovely. So looking back on my time in New York, on making the film, and on my time in Paderborn now, I realized that being visibly queer matters quite a lot to queer people, but also to society in general. I would say to you, if you can afford the fear and bring up the courage to represent queerness in public space, do. Because, especially for the most vulnerable of our communities, like trans people or queer people of color, we, as people who can actually afford it to show our queerness, are important to make them feel safe in a public space. If we represent a safe space in public, they can come to that safe space and feel safe as well. Also, everyone can do that. Queer people, allies, whether or not you choose to call yourself an ally, you can do small things. You can wear a pin or a bracelet on a bus, and maybe you will change someone's day. These people that did that in New York, they certainly changed my life, and I think everyone can do that. That's also why I made a film about that, because I felt like that's representation of queer people in art, which is also a public space. So I would say to you, be someone's subway story and speak up when you're in a public space. Show representation, because the more queerness we see in public, the less alien it becomes to everyone. And the less alien it becomes, the more other people realize that we are in fact not a threat. We are just people, like everyone else. And I would say to you, really, small things can change a life. They certainly changed mine. And I hope that you can carry that with you for the rest of your day and maybe the rest of your life. And I really hope that you choose to be someone's subway story. Thank you so much.